Welcome back to episode 3 of the Full 200. What's going on, everyone? This is episode 3 of the Full 200. And in today's episode, I will be talking about the 2026 NHL entry draft. So, as we all know, the draft lottery is over. And we saw a couple crazy moves in this draft that I think most people did not expect. And that is the Leafs jumping to get the first overall pick and the San Jose Sharks jumping to get the second overall pick. Now, those two moves are absolutely crazy, and I don't think anyone at all expected that. First of all, for at least the Leafs to jump from 5 to 1. Honestly, I think most people thought they were going to stay out of the top five and probably end up with like the sixth pick. And on top of that, the Sharks also jumped up like 7 spots, and they also now have another crazy that they even got another top three pick, and they're drafting second overall. So, what am I going to be talking about in this episode? I'm going to be taking all 16 lottery teams, and depending on what pick they ended up with, um, and who's available, I'm going to be predicting who I think each team should or will pick in their respective position. Without any further ado, let's get it started. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Toronto Maple Leafs ended up with the first overall pick. And honestly, with their pick, they could go a lot of different routes here. Now, I think we all know chances are Gavin McKenna probably will go first overall. And I'm not going to disagree with that. I do think that the Leafs are going to choose Gavin McKenna first overall. I think he has the ability to completely reshape any franchise, let alone the Leafs franchise, and could be the next superstar in this league. And I think that, no matter what, any team that got the first overall pick, I think it would be an absolute mistake if they pass on Gavin McKenna and they would regret it later on down the line. So I think no matter what, the Leafs should and probably will end up taking Gavin McKenna. Now, with that being out the way and Gavin McKenna off the board, as we all expected, well, at least most of us, I think that the San Jose Sharks are going to be wanting to pick a big, strong defenseman to pair with Sam Dickinson. They already have great forwards. They've got obviously like a top probably 10, maybe even 5 player in the league in Macklin Celebrini. He's going to carry that franchise. And he's already proven he can play with anyone. You just got to put someone good on his line, and he's going to produce. They've got Will Smith. They've got Michael Misa. They've already got plenty of forwards, good young forwards, and I think that they're going to need a strong defenseman to pair with Sam Dickinson for their future. And I think the perfect fit for that is Keaton Verhoff. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. But he is a big, strong right shot defenseman, good two-way ability, can also be a shutdown guy. I just think the fit makes too much sense for them to pass on him. So I have the Sharks taking Verhoff at number 2. On to pick number 3. And unfortunately for the Vancouver Canucks, they were supposed to get the first overall pick. Well, at least they had the highest odds. But unfortunately, because the Leafs have the first pick, the Sharks also moved up. The Canucks unfortunately dropped to 3. Now, of course, that's very unfortunate. They could have had McKenna, but I still think there's one player in this draft who is almost as good, if not honestly as good as Gavin McKenna, and that is Ivan Stenberg. And I think that the fit for him in Vancouver just makes way too much sense for them to take anyone else, let alone I just don't think they would even pass on him. I mean, like I said, it just makes too much sense. The Canucks, they love their Swedes. This guy is gonna reshape their entire forward core. And again, I know I keep reiterating it, but it just makes too much sense, and you can't pass on a guy like that. So at 3, I have the Canucks taking Stenberg. Up next at number 4 is the Chicago Blackhawks. And similar to the Sharks, they once again have a top pick to just add on to their already stacked prospect pool. And, they could go a lot of different routes with this pick. I think, they could just continue to add on to, their forward core and get pieces to play with Bedard, or they could look at the defensive route and, maybe want to choose a guy for the future to play with, Levshinov or Korchinski. And I do think that's the route they're going to go. And I think they're going to go with Chase Reed. And in my opinion, Chase Reed is neck and neck with Verhoff. And I feel like the Sharks could take either him, uh, Verhoff or Reed. But I do think they will take Verhoff. Therefore, I think the Blackhawks will take Reed, who is probably the second best defenseman in this class. And that is, of course, without talking about Carson Carrolls, who I think the Rangers will take at 5. I think that Carson Carrolls is the perfect player for the Rangers to take here. Again, seems like a very defensive, maybe not heavy, but there's a lot of good defensive defensemen or just defensemen in general in this draft class. And I think Carson Carrolls is the perfect player for the Rangers to take. Now, why I say that is because the Rangers, they should be entering their rebuild. And I feel like they already have a decent, forward prospect pool. It's not top end, but they've got some good young pieces. We saw them pick up Liam Greentree in the Panarin trade last year. Gabe Perreault looks like he's going to be a very effective NHLer. Malcolm Spence, he could be a nice solid piece. So I think they've got some good forwards, and I think that, Carson Carrolls could definitely add on to their defensive prospects. Now, at number 6, I think the most unfortunate thing happened to the Flames, and I was really rooting for them to move up. I think that they deserved definitely a top 3 pick, or like for sure I wanted them to get the first overall pick, but unfortunately they fell to 6. And you know, they still have some good pieces that they could take here, and in my opinion, I'm hoping for them to have Caleb Malhotra available to them at number 6. And, chances are that probably might not happen, but I think that he could honestly turn around this franchise and be their piece for the future. I think the fit just makes too much sense. They've got a great young puck moving defenseman in Zane Parik, and I think that Caleb Malhotra could be the guy who Parik feeds it to in the future. And I just want to see that duo. And like I said, I think it makes very much sense and it's a good fit. At number 7, we have the Seattle Kraken. And I think they may go a little off the board here and take Tynan Lawrence. I think that he is a perfect fit for them. He seems like he's a very capable two-way forward. And as we all know, Seattle loves their two-way forward. They're solid middle six uh, pieces. And I think Tynan Lawrence fits that perfectly. He's probably one of the safer bets in this draft class because of his defensive ability. And I think that he will be a perfect fit for Seattle. At number 8, we have the Winnipeg Jets. Now, I'm sure many people have been seeing the Jets were this close to getting the first overall pick. This close, but unfortunately went to the Leafs. Now, for them, I think the Jets are in a bit of a weird position. They have a bit of an older core, and that we've seen them have great regular season success. They just haven't been able to put it together in the playoffs. And unfortunately for this season, they have a lottery pick, and although lottery picks are usually good, I feel like the position that the Jets are in right now, I feel like they should probably be in win now mode. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they trade this pick. But since I'm not really including trades in this video, I'll have them keeping their pick, and I have them taking Vigo Bjork, who is a forward from Sweden, and I think that he is similar to Lawrence in the way that he is a safe pick, and it just to me it makes sense for him to be a Winnipeg Jet. It just seems like someone they would like. He kind of gives me uh, vibes of like a Mark Scheifele with a little bit better defense, but not as much offense. So I think if the Jets do decide to, keep their pick, that is who they will take. So next up at number 9, we have the Florida Panthers. I'm sure most people probably didn't expect them to be, in the lottery, let alone miss the playoffs, but here we are. And since they have the 9th pick, they have a chance to honestly draft a legitimate stud for their future and, add onto the already stacked roster that they have now. And in my opinion, there is one player on the board who I think perfectly fits the description of a Florida Panther, and that is Ethan Belchetz. I hope I'm saying that right. but he is a big, big power forward. Seems like he could be like a Matthew Tkachuk type, power forward player, get to the hard, rack up points, hits, whatever you need. To me, he just screams Florida Panther. Next up at number 10, we have the Nashville Predators. And to me, they're kind of similar to the Jets, where, most people might think that they're in win now mode. They have a bit of an older core. And I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if they traded this pick and tried to improve the roster. But like I said, we're not including trades. So with the 10th pick, I have the Predators choosing Albert Smeets, who is a big shutdown defenseman from Latvia. And, we actually saw him play in the Olympics with Latvia. And although he probably didn't have the greatest tournament, um, he's only 18 years old. And I think that this guy has a bright future ahead of him. And who better to learn from than Roman Josi, who was, maybe not as good defensively, but he was a top defenseman in the NHL for a long time. So I think that this fit makes too much sense. Now, at number 11, we have the St. Louis Blues, who actually also own the 15th pick in this draft. So they have a good chance to really bolster their prospect pool. We saw them sell off a couple pieces at the deadline, get some draft capital and stuff in return. So I think that now all they have to do is apply those picks and make them good, solid picks. And at number 11, I have someone who is probably in my rankings compared to other people's has fallen a lot. And that's only because a lot of these picks I'm thinking of, positional and team needs rather than best player available. And that is Daxon Rudolph, who is a top defenseman in this class. Who looks like he has great offensive upside. And I think that is the one thing that the Blues may be lacking a bit is offense from the blue line. Philip Broberg's good, but he's more of shutdown. Parayko's a shutdown guy. I just think that Daxon Rudolph would be great for this Blues team, and he would really strengthen their prospect pool. At number 12, we have the New Jersey Devils. Quite a disappointing season for the Devils, if I'm being honest. And again, like a few other teams I mentioned, like the Predators, the Jets, I think that the Devils could end up trading this pick. I feel like this is a big offseason for them, and we can see a lot of different things unfold. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded their pick, but in this scenario, we'll say they keep it, and I have them taking Oscar Hemming, who is a forward, and I think that he's just kind of a best player available type of guy for them, and maybe could even be a trade chip down the line or this offseason. Who knows? But I just think that they would take the best player available, and that is Oscar Hemming. At number 13, we have the New York Islanders. Now, honestly, at the beginning of the season, I really thought the Islanders would have, another top five pick. I did not expect them to be this good, but they definitely took the right strides. And although they don't have a top pick, I still think that this pick could really, really strengthen their prospect pool. Last year they had an insane draft. Obviously, they got Schaefer one, but they also got Sean Aitchison and as well as Eklund. And I think that they're going to add on to their forward prospect pool with Eklund and Yzerman, and they're going to be taking JP Hurlburt, who might be a bit of a reach to some people, but I think he has a lot of offensive upside. And, I think if they can, have him learn from a guy like Barzell or Horvat, I think he can turn into a very good NHL player. All right, next up at number 14, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets. And again, to most people, this team probably surprised a lot of people. Um, and, they are a good young team, and I think they have a chance to add on to their young core with this pick. And I have them taking defenseman Ryan Lynn, who seems like he has the capabilities to be a really solid puck moving offensive defenseman. And, he may not be like a Chase Reed or a Carson Carrolls, but I still think that he has a lot of offensive upside. And for a young Blue Jackets roster, I think that he fits in perfectly. They've got a young forward core with Fantilli, Johnson, hopefully Caden Lindstrom can turn into something for them. So I think that, they just need to strengthen that D core a little bit more, get some good prospects flowing in, and they'll be set for the future. So I have them taking Ryan Lynn at 14. So at number 15, like I mentioned earlier, it's once again the St. Louis Blues with the pick from the Detroit Red Wings that they got in the Justin Falk trade. So, like I said, because they have two picks, they really have a good chance to, bolster their prospect pool. And I think with pick 15, they kind of go with a little bit of a reach, but you have to hear me out for this. And I have them taking Brooks Rogowski from the Oshawa Generals. Now, this guy is a big human being at 6'7". Now, why I have them taking Brooks Rogowski is because the St. Louis Blues are the ones who drafted Tage Thompson, and they saw something in him that some other teams overlooked. And I think this will be the case again with Brooks Rogowski. Now, I'm not saying he's the next Tage Thompson, but he has a heavy shot, big power forward, can dig pucks out of corners. And I think that this time around, St. Louis doesn't make the same mistake of trading Tage Thompson, and they keep Brooks Rogowski and they develop him into a solid top six forward. And I think that he would be the perfect fit for them. So at number 16, we have the Washington Capitals, and they have a big offseason ahead of them. Whether they rebuild, retool, improve, stay the same. We don't know yet. It essentially all lies in the decision of Ovechkin and what he decides to do this offseason. So in this scenario, I just have them taking again best player available, and to me that is Ilya Morozov. I think he is a good, solid forward who they can add to their prospect pool, which may be a little weak, um, since a lot of other younger guys are starting to flow now. I think that this guy could just bolster their prospect pool. So there it is. That is my mock NHL 2026 entry draft for the top 16 lottery picks. Hopefully, this is somewhat accurate. I feel like some of my picks, maybe some teams are reaching, some guys are falling maybe too much. But I'm excited to see how well my picks match up when the actual NHL draft happens in June. So let me know what you think, and thank you for watching.